to talk a little bit about our program, what we do in here on a daily basis, a little bit about how a violin's made, and a little bit about our experiences that brought us this program as well as our experiences in the program. So, violin. A little bit about how it's made. Everything we do in here starts from a very raw resource that essentially is a chunk of a tree that's just been wedged and given to us, and we do everything else. So as you can tell right here, this is a quarter of a tree trunk that very much part of a tree. From there, we will then quarter that and turn that into a billet, which is what this is right here. So you can imagine that split up into more pieces. And then from this billet, we then cut in half and then glue these together like so. And this is what establishes the plate, which the violin is essentially carved from this plate right here. And by book, you hear the very common phrase of, oh, that's a book-matched piece of wood. So you can imagine a book-matched piece of wood. So you can imagine the figure running straight through the whole piece. It's cut in half and then flipped like this. So it's a book-match piece of wood. Once we have the billet carved, we then move on to making the rib structure. The rib structure is essentially the basis of the entire instrument. This is more or less a rib structure in complete form. The rib structure is built around a mold, which is what establishes the overall outline of the instrument. So starting with the mold, we take these thin pieces of maple, which we call ribs, and then using heat, we bend them to establish the outline. This is a temporary thing. When the rib structure is finished and the plates are carved, we will remove this, so this does not stay in the violin forever. It's purely for construction purposes. So once we have this finished, once we have this and the rib structure is bent around, it turns into something that looks like this. So this is what we have. This is after that process, we have what is called a rib structure. From the rib structure, we take this out, this profile, and we transfer it onto the billets that we had glued together and made the book match out of. From there, we then move on to cutting out the outline and then establishing the arching on the outside. That is all done with hand tools, gouges, what Marcus is using right here, and finger planes to create the overall shape. Once the outside is established, we then flip it over and we hollow out the inside. The inside is hollowed out to certain dimensions and thicknesses, ranging from about 2.5 to 4.5 millimeters in the back, and about 2.5 millimeters evenly across the whole instrument. So if you can imagine, that's about that thick. Not much for room for error. And then once we have that finished, the back is then put aside, and that's ready to glue on the top plate. Ready to glue into the rib structure. And then the top, we then proceed to cutting out the F-holes. And then we do a special thing on the top, which is called fitting a base bar, which we take a straight piece of wood and we perfectly chalk fit it to the internal shape of the instrument. So when it's in there, there's essentially no gaps. This is there to help support the stress of the strings in the top plate and evenly distribute the pressure throughout the whole instrument. Once we have that finished, we then move on to a step called closing the box. Closing the box is essentially what it sounds like. You glue the top plate onto the rib structure and the back plate onto the rib structure, and you have a box. It's a very momentous day. Once we have that finished, we put that aside and we move on to carving the neck and the scroll, which is all part of the same wood. This right here is what we start with when we're carving a scroll. Block of wood. Nothing exciting. And then from there, we move on to cutting out the outline, which is done with a bandsaw. One of the only power tools we use in here is a bandsaw. That's only for cutting out outlines. We don't use it for anything else. Once we have the outline cut, we move on to carving the actual scroll itself. This is done entirely with scrolls and gouges, so all hand tools and lots of room to make it your own. Once we have this complete, we take the finished scroll and the closed box and we assemble it all together, do a few finished little details, and we move on to varnishing the instrument, and then onto the most exciting part of the instrument, which is selling it. And starting over, so that's a little bit about how an instrument is made. I'm going to add on to about interest of violin making, which is really fascinating that a lot of people don't realize, is that people look, when a professionally level instrument made by a quote-unquote master violin maker, you look at that, wow, it's a master violin, more masterfully made violin. Well, what goes into making a masterfully made instrument? It's not as simple as just making a really, really good instrument. It's being incredibly aware of so many different fields, aspects of, like, just so many different things. So you have to have an incredibly good understanding of science, chemistry, history, art, architecture, wood, metallurgy, and so many other things that go into this one instrument. Without one of those variables, you won't have a masterfully made violin. So you really have to become a jack of all trades, not just jack of all trades, really, really, really good jack of all trades. So that's one thing that's incredibly interesting about this video. I'm going to then now I'm going to move on to a little bit about our experiences in the program and what led us to coming into this program. So I'm going to start with Jake to my left, who was the guy who was playing the fiddle when you guys walked down in here.
I'm Jake. I'm a first-year student here, and I'm 23 years old, and I've been wanting to come here since I was 12 years old. So that's a long time to wait. So I started taking violin lessons, fiddle lessons actually, in a violin shop back home in Vermont, and when I was a little kid. And so I'd come in every week and see all these gorgeous instruments hanging from the ceiling. You know, hundreds of beautiful, beautiful instruments. And I also loved woodworking, and realized that there's nothing more I'd rather do than put both of them together. And that being said, you know, 11 years is a long time to wait to come somewhere. And I was rather terrified on day one that I would not have the patience to finish a violin, because it takes, your first violin can take you 6 or 10 months to complete. That's a long time to wait before you have a finished product. But then I had this wonderful realization, which is that the violin, which is composed of maybe like 70 pieces of wood, there's a lot of tasks to complete. So every day when you come to school, you're completing and finishing a very specific, minute, detail-oriented task, and therefore receiving the joy and happiness that you get when you complete something and are able to head home at the end of the day.
This is Marcus to my right, and he'll talk a little bit about his interest in the program.
Exactly. And I'm actually very similar page to Jake. I actually found out that I wanted to be a violin maker when I was 12 years old as well. And I knew about the school right about the same time. And for me, it was just really one moment when I was walking from orchestra class to woodshop one day in 6th grade, and I realized people have to make these instruments. And from there, it was just, you know, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. So while I was in high school, I had a lot of pressure to become an engineer or some sort of scientist, you know, because most people think, oh, that's how you're going to make your money. You can never make money in crafts anymore or anything like that. But when it was time for me to actually decide where I wanted to go for school, I knew that my passion for making instruments and being in this sort of career just could not become a hobby. So coming here, for me, was probably the best decision that I've made in my life. And the experience here, it's absolutely amazing. Our teacher, Roman, he's an amazing person. He's one of the best makers in the world, and he's also an amazing teacher. He's probably better than all of my high school teachers, honestly. Yeah, it's a big compliment. But and coming into here every day, the best feeling in the world is knowing that everybody who's here is here because this is what they love to do, and this is what they want to be good at. And there's nothing better than coming in every morning, doing what you love, and knowing everybody around you is feeling exactly how you are.
I think you get that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.